A reading from the Gospel of Mark. Hear what God's Spirit is saying to you. When he returned to Capernaum after some days, it was reported that he was at home. So many gathered around that there was no longer room for them, not even in front of the door, and he was speaking the word to them. Then some people came, bringing him a paralyzed man, carried by 4 of them. And when they could not bring him to Jesus because of the crowd, they removed the roof above him. And after having dug through it, they let down the mat on which the paralytic lay. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, "Son, your sins are forgiven." Now, some of the disciples and the scribes were sitting there, and the scribes questioning in their hearts, "Why does this fellow speak this way? It is blasphemy. Who can forgive sins but God alone?" At once, Jesus perceived in his spirit that they were discussing these questions among themselves. And he said to them, "Why do you raise such questions in your hearts? Which is easier, to say to the paralytic, 'Your sins are forgiven,' or to say, 'Stand up and take your mat and walk'? But so that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins," he said to the paralytic, "I say to you, stand up and take your mat and go home." And he stood up and immediately took the mat and went out before all of them, so that they were all amazed and glorified God, saying, "We have never seen anything like this." Here ends the reading of the words that give us insight on God. May God grant us wisdom and courage for interpretation.
Hi friends, it's me, Simon, and I live here in beautiful Capernaum. You may not have thought Capernaum looked like this, but this is Capernaum. It's a town of about 1,500 of us and a pretty good place to live. I've got an incredible story to tell you today. Now, I'm not sure if you'll believe it or not. I was there, and it's hard for me to believe, but it is an incredible story. Let me tell you a little bit about myself first. I am Simon. I live here in Capernaum, and I fish for a living. It's a pretty good job. Capernaum's right here by the sea, great views. Hours are long, but I like it. But here's the thing. Over the past few decades, not just those of us here in Capernaum, but all throughout Judea, we have been feeling the weight on our shoulders, the weight of the Roman Empire. You see, we're all under the heel of a foreign dictator, and we would rather rule ourselves, you know. I would really love to live in the time when my ancestors lived. A free place, a free country. But I'll tell you, I've had hope recently because there is word of a coming Messiah. Now, that's never been my thing. I've never been real interested in that kind of thing. But something's happened recently that has changed my mind a bit. You see, this all started a few months ago. There's this guy out in the wilderness named John the Baptist. And he's this wide-eyed, wild-haired, certified weirdo. He wears camel hair clothing. He eats locusts and honey. A little strange for me. But my friends decided to go out and hear him, I'm sure just for entertainment value at first. But here's the thing. They came back, and they were filled with hope because he was talking about forgiveness and love and care and compassion. But one of the things that they really liked was this stuff about baptism. But John has been saying that there's something else something called baptism. And it's a way of recognizing that you're already spiritually clean as you are, that you are already loved as you are. And that sounds pretty good to me, to my friends. One bath, that's it. That's all you have to do. One day, they were there and this guy comes forth. He'd come to listen to John, to hear his message, and he wanted to be baptized. It was Jesus. And John said, this is Jesus. I can't baptize you. And Jesus said, you must. And John said, this is the guy. This is the Messiah. Jesus was baptized, and he went out into the wilderness, and he meditated for 40 days. And he went forth and started his own ministry, and then he went around and he started recruiting people just like me, ordinary, everyday people to follow him. Some of them even fish for a living, just like I do. And here's the thing. He's come and he has settled here in Capernaum. I don't know for how long, but he's got a house right here in Capernaum. Now, I'd never gone to hear him speak. At least I hadn't. But here's the thing. I've got this friend. His name's Jonathan. Jonathan is the funniest guy you'll ever meet. He's got this great sense of humor. You should hear him tell the joke about the time the Pharisee, the Levite, and the scribe walk into a bar. He's hilarious. But Jonathan is paralyzed. Can't walk. Never been able to walk. The whole time I've known him, he's been on a mat on the outside of town. He can't come into town. People think he's unclean. People think that if they touch him, that something might happen to them too. And they think that the reason he can't walk is because he has done something wrong, that he's being punished. I've never bought into that. I love Jonathan. He's one of the best guys I know. And so the other day, I was sitting there with Jonathan, and he said, I'm not doing so well. And I looked at him, and I could tell he wasn't doing so well. I could see the color draining from his face. And he said, could you take me to see Jesus? And I said, I don't know about that whole thing. They said, what have I got to lose? Could you take me to see Jesus? So I reluctantly agreed. It was going to be a big ask because here Jonathan was on the outskirts of the city, and Jesus, of course, lived on the other side of Capernaum. Jonathan couldn't walk. We were going to have to carry him. I couldn't do it myself. I was going to have to go get friends. So I did. I went and found 3 friends. I said, you all have just gotten baptized. You're not afraid to be becoming ritually unclean. Will you help me? So they committed to coming the next morning early, because you never know how long Jesus is going to be in town. So we got there early, and we decided that we would each pick up a part of the mat that Jonathan laid on. That was more comfortable than just laying on the ground. And so we each picked up one of the corners, and we started walking. And after a while, the sun started to beat down, and it must have been the hottest day we'd ever had in Capernaum. The sun was beating down on us. I could feel myself sweating through my robe, and we walked, and we walked. We walked past the well, and we walked past the marketplace. We walked past the synagogue, many places that Jonathan wouldn't even be allowed to go. And off in the distance, I could hear something, a bit of a ruckus. And my heart sank down into the pit of my stomach because I began to realize that this was not going to go like we had hoped. And as soon as we got there, we could see, off in the distance, we could see this line wrapping around Jesus' house. There were so many people there, so many people. And I looked at my friends. I thought, what else can we do? So we took the mat and we walked to the end of the line. And we waited. And we waited, and we waited, and the line had barely moved. And I looked down at Jonathan. I saw the sun coming down on him, and I saw the color draining from his face. And I said, we got to go. But Jonathan looked up at me, and he said, please, could we stay? What have I got to lose? So we stayed, and we waited. The line wasn't moving. But Joshua, I saw his face light up, and he said, I've got an idea. Now, you got to know Joshua to know how dangerous this was. Joshua is a bit of a wild card. He's always got some idea. He's the kind of guy that you could make plans with and think you're going to do one thing and then pivot at the last minute, and then the next morning you'll wind up in the next town over having done something completely different. He's a wild card. And so Joshua says, I've got this idea. And he runs over to Jesus' house, and he starts to climb up the side of the house and onto the roof. And he starts to motion over to us, and we're like, are you crazy? We're not. And he starts motioning, and we thought, well, what have we got to lose? And so we grab the mat the best we could and drug it over to the house. And he says, lift Jonathan up here. So we lift Jonathan the best we could, and Joshua puts his arms underneath Jonathan's, and he begins to lift him up from above as we push from below. And once we finally get him up there, Joshua says, throw the mat up. So we take the mat and we throw it up, and he says, now you all come. So we scale the side of the house, and we look at each other once we're all up there and say, now what? Are we going to dance on the roof? What are we doing up here? And Joshua starts digging. He tears away the thatch and the mud of the roof, and he tears it away so thoroughly that eventually you can see just through. You can see the people beneath. And he says, help me. Like, well, what have we got to lose? It's just property destruction, right? And so we start to tear the thatch and the mud away, and we are behind Jesus now. We can see, and there's so much commotion in the house that no one seems to notice. And so we take some of the thatch and we tie it to the mat, and we load Jonathan back on the mat and begin to lower him down. Jesus turns around, and he sees him there. He sees Jonathan just looking up at him. And he says, if you're feeling bad about anything, know you are forgiven. Now, there were scribes there, and they said, that's not the way to do it. That's wrong. That's the wrong procedure. You can't do that. But I thought maybe he's saying that Jonathan didn't have anything to feel guilty about. That maybe you didn't have to go through the proper procedure of going to the temple and meeting with the priest and buying an offering and burning the offering and then hoping that God might forgive you. That maybe Jonathan was holding on to something that God had long forgotten. He said, if there is anything that you're feeling bad about, you are forgiven. I could see Jonathan sitting there. And Jesus looked at him and he said, stand up, take your mat, and walk. And Jonathan began to stand up, uneasily at first, placing his weight on his legs for the very first time, and he began to hobble forth, and then he began to walk with greater ease and confidence, but he didn't stop there. He did a somersault And he began to run and to leap and to jump, and all of a sudden he had energy, and he didn't think anything like this was ever going to be possible, and there he was, filled with joy and hope. And we had never experienced anything like that before. And we looked, and we gave deep thanks. Jonathan went home, and I stood there in awe. What had just happened? And I heard that later that night, after Jesus had seen everyone that he could, he went on a walk. And he went out and found a booth, and there was Levi the tax collector. And he went to dinner with Levi. Now, that may not seem like a big deal to you, but we do not like tax collectors. And Jesus went to dinner even with him. He spent the whole day with outcasts. He spent his whole life around people that no one else would even sit down and talk to. Now, I don't know if all this stuff they're saying about Jesus is true or not. But I do know that someone who lives their life modeling compassion and love, well, that seems like someone that I might want to follow. What about you? May it be so, and thanks be to God. You know, this is one of those stories where that Native American proverb, I think, is very important. I don't know if it happened exactly this way, but I know that it is true. And one of the things that is the most true to me about that story is that there are friends in the story who take their friend who is ritually impure, who's an outcast, who's on the outskirts of society, and they grab him and they take him to Jesus because they are so filled with love. And I don't know about you, but one of the ways that I most clearly know God's presence in my own life is through my relationship with other people, through my love of others. And to me, this story is less about the miracle of being able to walk, because, right, there are a lot of people who pray for that miracle every day and it never happens. It's not so much to me about that. The miracle is these friends who care so much about their friend that they sacrifice everything to get him whatever hope that they can. And to me, that's powerful, and I love this story.